I didn't look in the mirror. Night 110 came. I pulled my hood over my head, and walked out the door glumly. My hair was the last thing on my mind. I climbed the lattice, feeling better with each step. That brought me closer to Edward's balcony, and climbed over, landing soundlessly, and knocking on the glass door timidly. Edward answered without looking at my face, and let me in. Once he glanced up and saw the back of my hooded head, I felt him slowly pull it down, letting my very unshiny hair free. I walked over to his bed, without speaking or looking at him, and unloaded his meal from my pack bag. I heard him flop down onto the bed, and begin opening the containers as I shuffled my way to the couch. Once I turned around and met Edward's gaze, his eyes widened.
"What's wrong?"
he asked, his forehead creasing in worry, while he sat in the middle of his bed holding the container of food. I grimaced, and flopped down onto the couch. I sighed, and darted my eyes down to my lap. "Edward, I have to leave tomorrow," I whispered, never looking up. I played with my fingers while the room grew silent, and still. It was thick and heavy, and I wished it never had to happen in the first place.
"You fucking promise me."
Edward growled accusingly from the bed. I grimaced, and peeked up from my lap, to meet his hurt, narrowed eyes. It broke my heart to see him hurt, and to think that I was the one causing it. My eyes welled with tears by instinct. I didn't even think I had any left to cry. I have to testify in the trial. It's 12 days. I croaked through the tears that were fighting their way through my eyelids. Edward's face softened a little, and he put his fork down.
"You'll be back?"
he asked, eyeing me skeptically. I nodded at him slowly, never taking my eyes off of him. His face relaxed, and turned more into a frown than anything else. He stared down into his container of food, with a little lock of hair falling over his eyes. He covered it up without a word, and set it down beside the bed.
"I'm ready for bed now,"
he whispered, staring at his lap. I nodded, and got up off the sofa, grabbing my bag, and shuffling into the bathroom, just as ready as he was to be in that bed. I barely brushed my teeth. I rushed, just itching to get in the bed with Edward. When I walked back out, Edward was already in his pajamas, and sliding the covers of the bed down. He glanced at me with a sad expression that just made my mood worse. I shuffled to the bed and crawled into it and under the covers, while he did the same. Once we were both lying on our backs, he lifted an arm to the lamp on the table, and turned it off. Just like always, just like instinct, we turned toward each other and wrapped the other in our arms. Edward pressed me to him tightly, burying his face into my hair, and mine, into his hard chest. I breathed in deeply, feeling him doing the same. I pulled my arm up, around his shoulder slowly, and began caressing his soft messy hair, making him sigh into the top of my head. I got a little shiver, so he held me tighter to him, so hard it felt difficult to breathe, but I didn't care. In fact, I moved impossibly closer, tangling my legs in his, and nuzzling into his warmth. He sighed again, and I began humming softly.
"Not yet,"
he whispered into my hair. I immediately ceased my humming, but kept stroking his hair and breathing him in. I nodded, understanding the need to appreciate the moment for a little longer. I could feel his big hand begin rubbing up and down my back slowly, pressing me against his chest, while my fingers dangled into his hair, and he nuzzled even further into mine. After minutes I felt him press a soft kiss to the top of my head, while still rubbing my back. I don't know what it was, but something about the soft kiss just broke me. I was tired of taking what I could get. I tilted my head up slowly to meet his eyes. When he felt my head move, he leaned his head back a bit to meet mine. All I needed was one glaze at those sad green eyes, and my mind was made up. I used the hand that was stroking his hair, and slid it down to the nape of his neck. He gazed quizzically into my eyes, but I didn't have time for quizzes and questions, or I would lose the nerve. So I quickly pulled my face up and put my lips on his. He stiffened, and halted his movements on my back. Completely.
"Stop,"
he whispered against my lips. But I kept going. I grabbed his pouty bottom lip and kissed it softly between mine, waiting for him to respond. But he didn't. He was still stiff. So I did what he did to me when I was frozen. I slid my hand around from his neck and cupped his face, gently rubbing his cheek with my thumb and taking his bottom lip again. But it didn't work. I pulled back minutely and took his top lip between mine, softly kissing it and forcing my bottom lip in between his, hoping he would respond soon. With one big gust of air, Edward finally responded. He brought his hand up my back and to the back of my head, crushing my lips into his. I began breathing heavily, sucking on his lips, while he sucked on mine. I brought my hand to his hair and fisted the back of it, pulling his face closer to mine. I opened my mouth and dragged my tongue across his bottom lip. He didn't hesitate, like last time. He darted his tongue out and met mine, making me moan softly. He just pressed me closer to him, shoving his tongue into my mouth, while I massaged it with mine. I sighed into his mouth, wrestling with his tongue and pressing my body closer. He groaned loudly into my mouth again, making my whole body heat up. But this time he didn't pull away. Instead he pushed me over onto my back and rolled on top of me, never breaking the kiss, holding himself up with one palm while the other pulled my face closer. I fisted my other hand into his hair and tilted my head so I could go deeper into his mouth. He groaned again and pressed down onto my body with more weight. I could feel every inch of his body pressed tightly against mine. And the feeling of what I was doing to him made me moan into his mouth again. He pulled away from my lips and started kissing and licking his way down my jaw to my throat. We were both gasping, and our chests were pressed together so tightly that we were panting the same rhythm. I tightened my head to give him better access, moaning at the sensation of his tongue on my neck. When I moaned he shifted roughly into my hips, and I could feel all of him. But I was too far gone to care about being indecent. I brought my feet up and wrapped them around his waist, whimpering softly and needing to feel him do it again. He let out a throaty growl against my skin and shifted between my hips again, earning another moan from me while I pulled and tugged at his hair, pushing him further into my neck, where he was kissing and licking. It felt like every cell in my body was on fire. He lifted his lips from my neck and dragged them up towards my ear. I could hear his every raspy breath.
We need to fucking stop.
He whispered in my ear huskily. But I shook my head, panting, and shifted my hips against his again, arcing my back off the bed, closer to his chest.
Fuck.
He groaned loudly into my ear and dropped his head into the crook of my neck, gasping for air and shaking his head, causing his nose to tickle my neck. And I was thinking that even though my virtue was supposed to mean something, I couldn't quite remember why. But this time he pulled away. He rolled over beside me onto his back, his chest heaving up and down, and his eyes still closed. I lied on my back, licking my swollen lips, and catching my breath, and wanting to touch Edward in very inappropriate places. We laid there for minutes, until our breathing calmed down. I chanced to peek over at Edward and he still had his eyes closed. Edward. I breathed, really hoping I didn't just ruin everything. He opened his eyes and slowly turned his head to meet my gaze. He didn't look angry or upset. His eyes were dark, and he had the look of what I assumed and hoped to be lust in his eyes. He let out a heavy sigh and shook his head.
That was really fucking stupid.
He muttered. I frowned at him, not really understanding what was stupid about it. He rolled his eyes at me in a very Edward fashion, and rolled over onto his side.
I'm ready now.
He sighed, then scooped me up and resumed our earlier position. As I pressed myself closer to Edward, I could see he was still quite excited. But it didn't bother me any. I pushed myself closer and he hissed, so I stilled and began stroking his hair. I wanted to tell him I was sorry for making him feel like that. But really, I wasn't sorry at all. He buried his head into my hair once again, and started breathing deeply, so I began humming to him quietly. Once he was asleep, I nuzzled into his chest, and closed